What I want to do in this presentation is just summarize what the Open Networking Foundation is doing and has underway in the area that we refer to loosely as CarrierGrade SDN. And to get started, I just wanted to provide just a high-level definition of why this has been such an important initiative for the Open Networking Foundation over the last probably about 2 years now. Originally, when we got started in 2011, we thought that Carrier SDN was something that was going to be in the distant future. And it turns out that things really changed quickly, in part because of NFV, but other factors as well, primarily tremendous traffic growth, spawned a pretty major interest in SDN and the activities that are underway in the ONF. And we responded by as a result of the many members who actually joined. So first, one of the trends, well, I mean, it's the last day of the conference. I want to go through these a little bit briefly. Clearly, mobility was one of these trends, which is the ubiquitous need for access to any device or data on any device, anytime, anywhere, and so forth. And then, of course, when we marry that with the cloud, it exerts a lot of pressure to make some disruptive change to the network to be able to address a set of services that are rapidly changing, but also to be able to address the capacity need that operators throughout the week have been talking about, which have been pretty tremendous, especially in a time when the revenues are flat. So in other words, with huge growth and capacity and flat revenues, something has to give and change in order to be able to address the end user needs over the long term. And then, of course, from the OEM perspective, there's been another fundamental change, and that is the operators themselves have been very vigilant about demanding and requiring that operators open up their platforms and move into a new domain that is really geared around not just multi-vendor, but trying to create a platform that we can use and everybody can work with to be able to deliver services over the long term. And of course, one of the important aspects, and we've heard a lot about this, and for those of you who were in Neela Jacques' keynote earlier, open source is a big part of it. So when we also looked at this, we looked at it from a slightly different perspective. Michael Howard, who is from Infinetics and of course is the chair of this morning's keynote session, who didn't have slides, well, I borrowed one of his slides to be able to share with you today, which is a survey that he did last year, and it's about a year old, and he surveyed operators that represent over the half of the CapEx spending in the world, and they indicated an overwhelming majority of those operators who are interested in not only deploying software-defined networking, but also network functions virtualization. And when we looked at this from the Open Networking Foundation's perspective, clearly we needed to respond, and we had initiated a number of activities to be able to address this need. This is a list of the number of operators who have actually joined the Open Networking Foundation, and what you'll see is that they span the entire world. I mean, China has a number of those operators. It's been one of the big growth areas for SDN. In APAC as well, and in various countries, Korea, India, and even in Hong Kong and smaller organizations, and of course Japan as well. And then of course, if you look at EMEA and North America, some of the major operators. And I did include the new generation operators in this list, the Googles or the Baidu's and Tencent and companies like that, because they really are transforming the way operators are approaching their networks over the long term because of the approach they've taken to actually address the cloud. And just another word, those operators, by the way, are the source of the direction for the Open Networking Foundation. In our charter, it explicitly specifies that only network operators can be on the board of directors and guide the activities. And that was to ensure that we would be able to validate the work products that the Open Networking Foundation produces. So this is a chart that just indicates the organization of the Open Networking Foundation that actually maps in the actual carrier activities. We have a discussion group called the CarrierGrade Organization that is actually responsible for gathering operator inputs and feedback and then be able to guide the rest of the activities in the group. Typically, it'll be through the architecture working group. And then, of course, we have to always consider security, even though security is not really a carrier. It's not just limited to the carriers. There aren't any of the segments that the ONF is serving where security isn't very high on the agenda. And actually, it is another observation that a lot of the resiliency and high availability and service availability requirements are not or not limited to the carrier. There aren't many enterprises or data center operators who would believe that they could actually survive if their services were not highly available. Now, that doesn't mean that they have to be reliable. That just means that the services have to be available. And then finally, in one of the other areas that's been a bright spot and been one of the areas that has attracted most interest is the optical transport area. And that's one of the reasons is because the operators are looking to software-defined networking to address their need for capacity, this need we referred to earlier. And the Optical Transport Working Group was formed to extend the ONF standards that were being produced to support optical networks, and specifically DWDM at layer 0, and then, of course, OTN at layer 1. And we also created a mobile wireless working group, even though that one's a little bit behind in terms of the participation and the need. It's not clear that the mobile wireless community is jumping on the SDN bandwagon in the same way in which the optical transport group had been able to serve the interests of the transport SDN community. And what we've also seen, in addition to the specific activities that are listed here, is that the whole direction of the Open Networking Foundation is very much influenced by what's happening with the operators, network or large telecommunication network operators. It's not just about the data center anymore. That's a perception that began in the early days of the ONF, but it's really matured and evolved since that time. And another question that we get all the time is, how does the ONF fit in to the overall CarrierGrade SDN activities? Because if you look and you listen around even this event, a number of different organizations have been represented. So the way we look at it is there's three classified groups. One is the industry groups that consist primarily of end users or network operators that are actually driving use cases, requirements, and priorities. And some of the groups that the ONF has been working with are shown here. Actually, we consider the ONF to be an industry group. It's not really a standards organization in the traditional sense. We do create some standards when necessary, but it's really more along the lines of trying to help drive the agenda and coordinate and collaborate with the rest of the industry to be able to address SDN requirements. The NFV group, for sure, has been one that has been, we know them well. I mean, this is an NFV conference, and the ONF was the first liaising organization with the NFV ISG to sign a memorandum of understanding which governs specific work product items in the area of layer 4 through layer 7 services, higher layer services. And then, of course, the Open Networking Users Group is an activity to provide a forum for large enterprise to at least have a discussion on open networking. It's not really they're not producing standards, they're not even producing formal recommendations, but they do provide a vehicle for operators to talk about open networking in the enterprise environment. Next to the standards bodies, and these are some of the traditional ones that have been collaborating with the Open Networking Foundation, the TM Forum, MEF, we're going to be, there's a workshop downstairs that the Metro Ethernet Forum has underway to talk about orchestration, so it's starting to get integrated into the overall SDN discussion. And then the OIF on the other side of the spectrum, in looking at the lower layers. And then finally, the open source projects are starting to gain momentum. And certainly, as we've seen throughout the week, open source is a key component to creating openness. Openness not only in terms of providing multi-vendor solutions, but rather solutions that are vendor neutral and incentivize and encourage vendors to participate in the community. And that's why something like Open Daylight as an open controller framework has been so successful. It's because no single organization controls it, and then the groups that are participating all have a fair access or a level playing field in actually participating. And if you want to read a little bit more about this, I wrote an article for Light Reading that was published a couple weeks ago, just based on the fact that we get a number of questions on this, and you can take a look, and it shows how these groups fit together and elaborates a little more. There'll be a reference to that in the slides. One other activity I just wanted to mention is that an example of where the industry collaboration has been quite dramatic has been the ONF and OIF prototype demonstrations for Transport SDN. This is an activity that included 9 vendors, 7 operators across the globe who collaborated and coordinated over an open flow-based SDN, Transport SDN infrastructure, where we were addressing not only the ability to control multiple types of hardware using a programmable interface, but also the northbound interface as well, which is a very important interface in the overall architecture. Northbound in this case defined as how do applications interact with an SDN network architecture. So this was a multi-layer infrastructure that was actually controlled, layer 0, layer 1, and layer 2, and there were a number of different tests that were performed and with groups of the vendor and operators working very closely to stage a series of tests, and the equipment was all hosted in operator labs. And then we did a series of readout events last year. You might have seen one of the press releases. We also have a white paper that's available on the Open Networking Foundation site. And it's an activity that we're going to continue to refine in the next year to 18 months. There's been tremendous interest because of the vendor participation, the obvious participation of the largest and some of the most important operators, and other operators have expressed interest as well. But this is an indicative of what the ONF's role is in the overall SDN architecture. Our role is not just to create specifications or to provide some means of examining what the use cases might be, but we're attempting to participate and pull together a lot of activities across multiple different organizations to be able to address the big picture and also to be able to drive convergence where it makes sense for the operators. And this is sometimes inconvenience to the OEMs involved, but that's not the primary consideration of the Open Networking Foundation. Now, that's not to say that we don't serve the interest of OEMs. We have mostly OEMs in our membership, but what we want to do is continue to validate all the activities that we have underway. And with that, I just wanted to, again, appreciate the opportunity to share the ONF story and take a question or two in the time we have. If anyone has. Yes? Oh, you have a microphone coming? Thank you.
So it's great that you've got access to so many.
Yeah, I think it's working.
Okay, great you have access to so many operators, you know, in the ONF. What would you say would be if you were to ask them the 2 most important things on their agenda for them as a theme?
Oh, well, clearly Transport SDN is one of them. I mean, we had great participation throughout most of the world's leading OEMs who are actually driving this, and operator participation as well. So this is certainly one of the successes. The other one is NFV. There's been so much interest in NFV. What we were attempting to do is to extend the idea behind the optical transport activity within the ONF was to extend the ONF standards down, or in other words, we started at layer 2 and 3, in essence, Ethernet and IP, and then we extended down into optical. Well, the NFV activity is to extend the ONF standards up to layer 4 through layer 7 services. And we actually have a proof of concept as well that has been accepted by the ETSI NFV, and we have a number of participants who are involved in both the ONF and the ETSI NFV ISG who are intending to look at how we can build service chaining on top of the ONF SDN architecture, how we can build NFVI and so forth.
And they're doing it because why? I mean, the technology, the solution is fantastic, but what do the carriers see as the benefit of doing this?
Well, the benefit of SDN, of course, is agility. I mean, let's face it, it's a triple play value proposition. It's agility, OpEx reduction, and CapEx reduction, ultimately. But let's put it in perspective. Most of the operators that are participating in the ONF, they just want to make everything go, as one put it, we want everything to go faster. I really like that because it really captures what this is all about. Certainly there's optimizations that can drive down CapEx, as you put forward in your presentation. And certainly there's operations that can be streamlined through automation, not just automation, but transformation as well. But at the end of the day, it's about generating revenues at a time when revenues are flat, and then being able to, participate in a completely dynamic and changing landscape, which is the competitive landscape has never been so challenging for some of the major operators, with the non-traditional operators coming in and offering services, and large enterprise building private networks to bypass the operator services. All the factors are coming together that really are forcing major telecommunication operators to look at their strategy, which is what we're seeing their responses, and we've heard about it all throughout the week. Thank you. That's pretty good for day 4 or 5 of the event. Yeah. Anyhow, go ahead. Robbie
here from Camp Technologies. I want to just find out, you have these different groups that you talked about, the availability group, the CarrierGrade group,
Yes.
the security group. Are they going to be producing some kind of requirements, and when do you expect these requirements to be available?
They actually have produced some documents that are publicly available. The ONF is a members-only organization, so a lot of the internal documentation is not available. But again, because our goal is openness at some level, what we're attempting to do is to publish the outcomes of our work, but not the intermediate work. And we invite the community to participate in the discussion. So we do have an architecture document that you can download. We have I think the security document is now published. We have a document that indicates what the optical transport extensions are to OpenFlow and our ONF standards. That's now publicly available. I think there's a migration working group migration document that examines how about 4 operators migrated from existing networks into the SDN universe, which is obviously extremely challenging, and it details the use cases as well. And then, of course, we have a number of other publications that you can take a look at on the Open Networking Foundation site to go and look at how does Open SDN benefit the various different segments that we serve: data center, campus and enterprise and campus, and then, of course, the carrier WAN segment. So there's quite a few documents that are available, but we encourage everybody to get together. And I think we're out of time, but thank you again